So before I go into the Sufi situation itself, I'm going to talk about a few commonalities in the Bhakti philosophy. Everything is moving towards the truth. The truth is called Satyam. That's why we always say Satyam eva jayate. Eventually, the truth will win. So, how do we greet each other when we meet in the ashram? We say Hari Om and we say Hari Om Tat Sat. So, you have to understand why we are saying Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari means that which draws you to itself without your control, irresistibly. You are not able to resist it, you are pulled towards it. That is Hari. And why does it pull you like that? Because it is a part of who you are, larger part of who you are. So it pulls you because that's who you are. Om. Om is the Akshara Brahman, that is the sound vibration which is responsible for the whole of manifestation as we understand it. Tat means that. Sat means truth. It means that truth which pulls you towards itself irresistibly is in the form of Omkar. That is what the Vedas say. The Vedas say, in the beginning there was Brahman, Parabrahman, and second to him was the Akshara Brahman, the word, the vibration. Today we call it vibration. This is English translation. The word itself was Brahman because he becomes the universe through that sound vibration, which is called Akshara Brahman. Akshara means which cannot be destroyed. Kshara means which can be destroyed. Akshara cannot be. So from that Akshara Brahman, the special power of the Supreme Paramatman manifests itself. That is called Maya. And this Maya first manifests as an eternal, undifferentiated vibration called Nada. From the Nada evolves into a concrete, sensible world. This is the world we see around us. You, me, the chair, table, the trees, um, the holy people, the bad people, everybody comes out of that vibration of Omkar using and according to the um, combination of the gunas, rajas, tamas, sattva, they manifest in different ways as different forms. But all of them come from the same gunas and the same vibration. This word, this mantra, Om, is an incarnation in all individuals, and each person can directly realize their divinity through the sacred power of this word. In other words, when we are talking about an avatar, we are saying this Akshara Brahman, this vibration becomes flesh in an avatar, it becomes like a person and it descends. This is what the Vedas say. Now, what does Christianity say? They say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That means God was already there, the Parabrahman, and the Akshara Brahman belonged to him. And the Word was God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. Now, do you see any difference between what the Vedas say? Almost word for word, right? Now, when you have a guru in any religion, the master or the guru becomes like a door. We are standing outside, we are looking at the manifested world around us, and we are trying to understand life from that perspective. Inside the house, inside the divine house, is the divinity. And we are in one state of consciousness. The Supreme Parabrahman is another state of consciousness. We don't have a way to go there or to understand. So, a person who manages to break the barrier and go towards the Brahman is like a security guard. He becomes the door. And through that door or through that guru, we see the Parabrahman or the Paramatman. Now, what does Jesus say for that? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. What does he mean? Not him as a physical person. Through his consciousness, which has reached a higher dimension, you come through me, I will help you. What does Krishna say? In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, I am the end of the path, the witness, and the sustainer. Fools pass blindly by the place of my dwelling here in the human form. And of my majesty they know nothing at all. Fill your heart and mind with me, you will come into my being. This is what Krishna is saying. Now, what does the Buddha say? He says, you are, to his disciples, of course, you are my children, I am your father. I myself, having attained salvation, can help you. My thoughts are always in the truth, Satyam. For to myself, I have become the truth. That is, he has merged into the Satyam. And what does Mansur say? Remember, I told you about the Sufi who was burnt alive after being thrown stones. He kept saying, Anal Haq, Anal Haq. I am the divine. In other words, he is saying, Aham Brahmasmi. Now you have to understand that all masters, all gurus, all people who have reached a certain level and who can help the disciple to cross over the world that we see externally, they talk about their divinity when they say, I am the way, or come to me, I will help you, trust in me, surrender to me. They are not talking of the lower ego self, which they also have because they have a form. Anything that has a form has an ego. What does ego mean there? It means a specific, an identity, a specific combination of sattva, rajas, tamas, which creates that particular personality and person. But that is not where they are talking from. When they start saying that, come and give your surrender to me, I will take care. What are they saying? They are telling you, raise up and see me as the doorway through which you also can come into the house of the divine. So this is the validation, because we cannot see that something higher by ourselves. We need somebody who has reached that point and who has been given the authority by the Supreme to bring people. Every person who has reached there is not necessarily a guru. Everybody has a different portfolio. I'm only talking of the gurus. Because what does Jesus say? He talks to his disciples and they don't really understand what he is talking. So towards the end, just before he is crucified, he breathes on his disciples. He puts the prana into them and he said, receive the Holy Spirit. That is, receive the Divya Chakshu. And when that happens, they see him in a different way. They suddenly see him for a few minutes full of light and not like the Jesus that they saw before. Just like Yashoda looks into the mouth of Krishna and she sees all the universes. Markandeya looks at that baby with the toe in the mouth, and when the baby inhales, he goes into the stomach and he has the Vishwarupa Darshana and he comes out with the exhaling. So for all this, we need the grace of the Paramatma, or at least the grace of a guru who has reached that point and who is willing, who has been ordered to help you to reach that point. That's why Krishna tells Arjuna, I will give you the divine sight. Divyam dadami te chakshuhu. Because you cannot see it with this physical eye. If you want to see another dimension, you have to have a different eye altogether, a different perception, a different consciousness. That is why when people talk about what they are experiencing there, they are not able to communicate. They have to communicate through a story, a joke, or through a song or a dance or something. They are only like milestones saying, go that way. This is where it's happening. So now, why come as different avatars at different times? Because spiritual culture all over the universe is so fluid, it doesn't remain static. It moves in waves. There is always a rising and a coming down, surging and falling, surging and falling. And when there is a fall in a nation's spiritual life, when truth and righteousness is neglected and forgotten, then an avatar is born to relight the flame of spirituality in the heart. And this spirituality comes down in different ways as different religions, because different countries, now at least we are global, but those days we had no communication between countries. So according to the situation, the context of that country, the avatar or the divine will take a name appropriate to that. It's like when you have a father, you call him Appa, or you call him Papa, or you might call him Anna in certain communities, or you might call the, if you go to England, they'll say daddy. The relationship is the same, but you call him by different names because of the cultural context. So in the Vedic situation, it's very important that you remember three things: the time, the place, and the person to whom this is being said. Desha, Kala, Patra. What you say here may not always be relevant to saying the same thing in America. You might have the spirit may be same, value system may be same, but your words will be different. The way you put it across will be different. Even in our own society, if you have 5 children in a house, the way the mother has to put, or father has to put it across to one child will be different from the way it is put across to another child, because the child's context is different. He's a different patra. He may be receptive, he may not be receptive. It may be in a different time. What I tell you today may not be the same thing that I tell you 10 years later, because you have grown, I have grown. Many things have happened to our relationship. So when I tell you that, if we still trust each other, we will say, but you told me that the other day, now you're telling me this. I think there is a contradiction. Can you explain? That is, if we still have that same relationship. If you didn't have that relationship of trust, and we are immediately ready to think that we are, one is trying to dominate the other, then what happens is, when I tell you this years later, say 10 years later, you will say she always contradicts herself and you can't trust her because she's saying one thing yesterday, she's saying one thing today. Because we don't have that relationship of trust to clarify with each other. So then people who listen to a person like that will go away thinking she is untrustworthy. This is what happens in cultural situations all over the universe. It doesn't happen in an animal life. A lion in Africa will behave towards a tiger in Africa the same way that a lion in India will act towards a tiger in Africa, in India. A bird flying into Pakistan will fly the same way, breathe the same air that a bird flies in India. Nobody asks a bird to get a visa to fly. Nobody calls a bird an Indian bird. So these differences are brought in us because we are specializing in the outside world. We are building houses, we are building tunnels, we are building high story buildings, we are discovering and inventing electronics, electrical things. Continuously we are changing. So you cannot call a plumber and ask him to correct your electricity. Each one specializes in something, so that person has an identity for the sake of the laukika vishya. That is, so that we can call the appropriate person and talk to them to, if it's for the sake of communication. But the plumber and the electrician and the and Ratan Tata or a beggar on the street, they all breathe the same air. They have the same grief. They have the same anger. They have the same desires. The thing is, we need to keep people identified differently, and so this quality of ego comes. Ego is not good or bad. Ego just means a specificity, yeah, which makes a person different from another person because of the gunas. Now, keep that in your mind. This is why we, even avatars are different, religions will be different, languages will be different, food habits will be different, but the satyam, the dharma within each person is the same because we all come from the same source. We might follow it or we may not follow it. If we follow it, we are relatively happy. If we don't follow it, we are unhappy and suffer. So it doesn't depend on satyam. The suffering depends upon our ignorance or our knowing what it is. So now we come to look at this from any angle that you wish. And you'll find out that nobody is perfect. Sita says in the Ramayana, na kaschit na aparadhyati. That is, there is nobody in the world who is without a fault. Why? Because the only thing that is perfect and complete is the underlying force beneath omnipresence, that which is present in everything. It's absolute. And that is the Parabrahman. When you look at anything manifested outside, it can never ever be perfect. It will have its own limitations. Otherwise, there is no need for evolving. So when you look at a guru or when you look at any being who talks about something higher, even if you don't understand it, you can know that even if it's a person very brilliant, who you consider as spiritual, don't look at their external looks or behavior patterns. You look deep into him or her or whatever, or it. Look deep and see the subtle vibration. Because even an avatar that's born on earth and takes a human body, he creates certain limitations into himself. He has hunger like anybody, thirst like anybody, illness like anybody, death like anybody. So this is the spirit that is there in um, every spiritual science. Every mystic has spoken about it. But some of the disciples have been mature enough to want to make a break in the barrier of the limitation and move higher and reach the Paramatma. Now, to do that, you must love the Paramatma enough. Otherwise, why would you want to take that leap into another dimension of consciousness? Some people are not able to handle sleep itself. They get scared. They get bad dreams. Imagine if you are thrown without any help, without any guidance into another dimension altogether, you won't know what is happening. And you can break down into a psychotic phase, or you can get lost on the journey. So you need a guru. Now, all um, spiritual sciences say what is very, very important. That is why I sent you all that saying by Swami Satyananda. The Bhagavad Gita says, hatred binds, love liberates. That is, if you hate something or you're afraid of something, you will constantly keep remembering it. It will be there whichever side you turn. One day I told you that if somebody doesn't like ginger and you go for a wedding and they only put a quarter-inch size of ginger into a big dish for where they are making a sambar or something for, say, 1,000 people, that little thing will come into the plate of the person who dislikes it immensely, because your vibration of dislike will attract the vibration of the object that you dislike. Hatred binds, love liberates. Now, we are not talking of an emotional love or sentimental love. We are talking of love as a great force which comes from Paramatma into the heart of a sincere devotee and sort of pushes the devotee up in a certain way on the spiritual path. This comes with the help of a guru or with the grace of God. Now, why do they say this and why do they caution you about this? Because until we have reached oneness, that is yuj. Yuj means binding. You bind with God. You bind with the Paramatma. The Jivatma merges into the Paramatma. Until we do that, we will always, because we are not perfect, we will have quarrels, misunderstandings, but we mustn't give up on the search. We mustn't give up on the journey. So they say if you're sort of on the journey and you're practicing meditation, your prana will be high. When your prana is high, what happens? Hatred binds. If you're irritated, the fact that the prana is high, it will magnify your irritation and it will make it into a real big anger or rage. If you're just feeling a little out of sorts and unhappy, a little bit about something small, if you're in meditation, it will raise your unhappiness and make it into a great grief. That is why we don't advise clinically depressive patients to do yoga nidra or meditation, because it will um, expand their sense of hopelessness and depression. So having that much, got that much, if you have understood that much, I'm saying we have to break the barriers because of which we feel that we are somebody, the other person is somebody else. You see what has happened in all countries, especially in India, when you have a politician standing for polls, even though we know the person may not be very honest, what do we say? Nammavaru, avrgene hakbeku. The vote, we have to do it for this person because he's our man, our community. So what do? We are going against the truth of the uh, purpose of an election. So if you happen to get somebody who is corrupt, then we have nobody else to blame. We have moved away from Satyam. So going towards Satyam means a responsibility, a determination, a sankalpa. Now, having said all this, I'm coming to I was just trying to give you um, a look into the different ways that different religions can look at the same thing, and they are looking at it in the same way at the level of the mystic. At the level of the devotee or disciple or the follower, it need not be the same. It will not be the same, because every person looks at a an object, whether it's an idea or a thing or a person, looks at it from our own karmas. We look at it from our own samskaras. So what happened was Muhammad, I'm not going to talk about Muhammad here, some other time. He noticed that the people who were following an ancient way of life, the tribes, had certain value systems. For example, they always waited for the weakest among them to catch up if they were traveling somewhere, like migrants, because the tribe was one single unit. They would not leave the weak person and walk ahead. Then they were very hospitable. Many things like that. But what happened was, over a period of time, those people who started doing well in trade became richer. And when they became richer, they started neglecting the poorer masses. So they had a major gap between the rich and the poor. And somewhere Muhammad thought, this is not the way God wanted us to live. Everybody has to be equal here. So he had certain mystical experiences. And then people who were against him, because they had at that time 365 gods, and people who were against him would go into battle with him, and he would also fight, because that was the way those days, like the Mahabharata. And later, he did not hand over the mystical dimension to everybody, to all his followers. He waited to see who was mature enough to handle that energy. It's an energy, it's a vibration, it's a diksha. So what did he do? When he waited enough, he found that his son-in-law, Ali, was receptive. So Ali was initiated into the spiritual aspect of Islam. And from that point, many things happened where these people were called Sufis. And just to give you a little input into the Sufi life, just so that before we go into the story, it has been described as a science through which one can know how to travel into the presence of the divine by purifying one's inner self and beautifying it with a variety of praiseworthy traits. In other words, when you travel into the presence of the divine, you're practicing yoga. All yoga is for the Jivatma to become one with the Paramatma. That is called Yuj or yoga. And how does that science work? By purifying your inner self, that is Chitta Shuddhi. Beautifying it with a variety of praiseworthy traits. This is how it's described. What are the praiseworthy traits? The ornaments of the Atman, the Veda says, is not the jewelry. Even the jewelry you see on the deities in the temples symbolize love, compassion, all your yamas and niyamas. Now, what is the main sadhana of the Sufi? Attachment to what is called dhikr, D-H-I-K-R. It's nothing but nama japa. And to live very simply. The universal philosophy of Sufism, the word Suf comes from Safa, purity. And there were people, some very poor people, who were called Al-As-Safa, that is the people of the bench in translation. Those were a group of very poor companions of the Prophet Muhammad, who would sit regularly on the bench outside, and they would all do a group nama japa. So that was what was called, that was why they were called Suf. Now the basic views were that in general, all Muslims believe they are on the pathway to God and hope to become close to Him in Firdaus. Firdaus means paradise. This is what they think. After they die, then they will go to paradise, then they will meet him. This is why some people say they will give their lives because they will get siddhis in Firdaus. But Sufis believe differently. The spiritual dimension of Islam says it is possible to draw close to God and fully embrace the divine in this life itself. How? By restoring your primordial state of fitra. Fitra means it refers to what we were speaking of yesterday, the pratikulya vivarjana anukula nischaya. That is, doing what you think the divine would like you to do, which is good to all beings, and not doing what he would not like you to do, which is being hurtful to other people. So, if you come now to the method, that also they will tell you. The method is self discipline, ekagrata, that is completely brahmachintana, thinking of only one thing. And how do you think of this? You don't think of Brahman as something like a piece of cloth somewhere or just a statue. If you see bhaktas, even if they start praying, if it is Purandara Vittala or whether it is Tirupati Venkateshwara or if it is Guruvayur Krishna, by the time they get intimate with the divine, when bhakti happens, it becomes a very loving relationship. You can call him your companion or your child or your mother or your father or your lover. In any way, the human self melts away. You have a very loving relationship with that divine. And in that way, the Sufis called the divine as the beloved. So they felt that they are going towards the beloved, nothing else matters. But first, you can't just say, I'm going towards the beloved. You have to find a teacher, a guru. And the guru is authorized to teach from, he has to be part of a lineage which comes from one guru to another, one guru to another. Any mullah cannot say, I am a guru. It's an unspoken succession. It's called silsila, unspoken succession from the prophet. And those people must be very strict in the way they live, the gurus themselves. The yamas and the niyamas, they must do it for many, many years. And what should the disciple do to live with a Sufi master? They should live and serve the master, not in an academic way, not printing out his talks and doing, or massaging his feet or anything like that. It's a heart to heart vibration. You try to understand what the guru is teaching you and not look at the superficial teaching that happens. If he says do karma yoga, Swami Satyananda would do this. He would put you along with somebody you can't get along with at all. And you'll say, now both of you do this work. He would say it very innocently, but you will be creating sparks between each other. He has put you together purposely. People will say, Swamiji, can I shift from this project? Can I work with somebody else? He'll say, no, 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 you have to work with that person. Why? Because you have to go inside and find out why you're so distressed working with somebody else. What is it in you that is creating this insecurity or anger or hurt or anything? And then you have to put it right. So this is what they had to do. There was a Sufi who was called Bahauddin, and he had a very great spiritual preparation where in utter humility, he was a big person when he came to the Guru. And to learn tolerance to the weak and needy members of society, he had to work helping them out. They, just because somebody is needy or poor, they may not be nice. They may be nasty. They may be harsh. Look at the doctors and the poor helpers going to colonies, and then they are stoned now in the corona time. It's like that. That doesn't mean you hang up your stethoscope and say, oh, tomorrow why should I bother? You have to go again. That is a sort of learning also. After he completed that for many, many years, he was put to care for animals, any animal, cleaning their wounds assist them in finding provision. Remember, they won't tell you, take this rice and keep it for that bird. You have to help the bird in finding provision. You have to help the animal. That means you have to live with that animal. Then they would say, take care of the dogs. Ask the dogs for their support. Talk to the dogs, find out when they want the food, when they don't. You can't just go and put it at 8 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the night or something like that. That's what we all do at different times. This is not like that. You live with that dog, you take care, you understand the dog. Maybe you understand the language of the dog. That means you're growing closer and closer to those beings that are closer to Satyam than you are, because they trust and they go on continuing. You look at a dog, you have a dog, you might beat it and the dog will come back to you and lick you. This is unconditional love that you get only from a dog. It will not sulk, it will not get angry and bite you the next time. So, masters, the gurus will put you into those situations. And after that, you're supposed to sit in a solitary retreat for many, many years and understand the things that are coming up from the chitta, the unconscious mind, your resentments, your fears, your anxieties, all that. So this was the way they learned. And they, in the Sufi psychology, they also believed in the gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Tamas was called a domination by the lower self, and it is called by nafs. Nafs, beings that get into you and make you tamasic. Rajas is called kalp, it's a spiritual heart, and sattva is the soul, that is called ruh. They also had the chakras, and your practices were very different from place to place except for the dhikr or the nama japa. Otherwise, the masters would um, do different things for different disciples so that they become literally broken, like the gurus will do today. They will break you. They will not all the time be, what do you call, sugar daddies. They will put you in difficult situations. Like the corona is doing, as God is like a guru now. He puts you in a lockdown, and people who are used to going out and meeting friends, suddenly you're not able to handle it. People who have been depending on society to feed them, they don't get food suddenly. So what do? You have to be resilient. You have to trust that God will bring it, and you have to do something about it yourself. So disciple cannot do anything without an authorization by the guru, in that sense there. Now, the idea of all this was like our yamas and niyamas. Give up the idea was that this disciple will give up pride, boastful nature, arrogancy, envy, hope for a long life. And master has different techniques. Uh, and he will still say, with all that, he will say the technique will not bring God to you. The techniques is for self purification, chitta shuddhi, exactly what the guru will tell you today. Don't think by doing karma yoga God will come. No, by doing karma yoga you get chitta shuddhi. When you have chitta shuddhi, then God will decide, is this the time to give this person guidance? So proper guidance under a master is absolutely necessary. The seeker has to become like a broken person. All habits, all the practice of solitude, silence, hunger, sleeplessness, all that will be put on the disciple so that it breaks down the ego. The guru will deliberately make it difficult so that your ego is broken down completely. When your ego is broken down completely, then the Diksha comes. So now, let me tell you one or two stories. It's 10 minutes to 9. Okay. There was a person called Jalaluddin Rumi. Jalaluddin Rumi was a young child. He lived in a place called Rum. And he and his father had to leave because there was persecution in that area. The whole family and the people from that area, they all left and went to another place. And when they were going out, a mystic comes across them and he looks at the father who is walking ahead and the son is at the back, and he says, "Here comes a sea followed by an ocean." And he gives the boy was about 9 or so, he gives him a book called Asra Mama, which talks about the soul getting caught up in the material world. This meeting had a great impact on Rumi. Later on, when he started writing, he followed the way this book was written. His father was a head of a madrasa. He was a great scholar. And when he died, Rumi got that position. While he was running the position of a scholar, come judge, come interpreter, all that of the head of a madrasa, he also practiced Sufism under another guru called Burhanuddin, who later died. And after that, his public life began. He started, he was like a judge, Islamic jurist. He was a teacher, a preacher. And one fine day, what happened was he was giving a talk in a park-like place. And his fame spread everywhere because he was very good. And I suppose he must have felt very confident also. But somewhere inside there was a sense of emptiness. He felt this is not enough. I have to go beyond all this, beyond the academics. And he knew he could not do it alone. He needed a spiritual guru. So what he did was, um, he was sitting by a pond with disciples and a whole pile of books, because those days you wrote down. And at the same time, there was a person called Shams Tabriz, who was very accomplished in the spiritual sciences. He had different gurus in a place called Tabrizi. And he was a, a very loved disciple of a mystic called Baba Kamal. One day, Baba Kamal told Shamsi Tabrizi that there was a lot on his chest which he could not express, because he had a lot of understanding, but he couldn't say what it was all about. He didn't have that much learning. Like Paramahamsa, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa needed a Vivekananda who would bring out what he felt inside to the common man. So the Kamal Baba predicted to him that he would meet a person who would become his tongue, meaning that he couldn't talk. This person would talk and say what he wanted to say. So, having this dream in his mind, Shams went searching. And this was the time when Rumi was sitting by a pond with a pile of books. Shams walked into that place. He was having disheveled hair and dirty clothes. And he pointed to the books and he asked Rumi, because he was teaching them, what is it? And Rumi said, what would you know about all this? See the arrogance. Shamsi Tabrizi took the books and he threw it in the water. There was a big water pond there. Rumi was greatly upset because they were his handwritten manuscripts. When it goes, where will he go? Immediately, Shamsi Tabrizi saw Rumi looking upset. He bent down, took the books from that pond without any water on them, and he put it back the way it was. So Rumi was surprised. He said, what is all this? He said. And Shamsi Tabrizi answered him, what do you know about all that? The same thing that Rumi had said. Immediately, Rumi threw away his religious cloak and hat and chased Shams. He found him in a house and he went there. He asked him for permissions to stay with him, stayed in total seclusion for 6 months. When he came back, he was no more that person after 6 months who went inside. He came out completely changed, reciting poetry in Persian, singing and dancing. I sent you a picture of some dancing people. So Shamsi Tabrizi stayed with him for less than 2 years, during which time Rumi's disciples were very hostile to him because they had a structured way of studying, and here was this man who changed Rumi completely. Rumi was no more the dignified man who would walk in with a hat and the dress and sit in the jurisdiction and do what he was meant to do. He was just dancing on the street. So when they disliked this man so much, um, Rumi became very upset, and he um, identified completely with this person whom he considered his guru. He heard that Shamsi Tabrizi was in Damascus. He sent his son there with a letter begging him to return. Again, he came back, Shamsi Tabrizi. The mystic meetings continued, and Rumi used to talk to Shamsi Tabrizi about the visions he had, the thoughts he had, what is happening with his spiritual journey. Again, there was jealousy and anger. Please remember, when you go on the path of Satyam, there is a lot of Asatyam around you that will constantly keep stopping you because you don't confine yourself to a structured level. So one day Shams left the place without leaving any trace, and Rumi, who loved him so much because he called him his guru, he danced and sang in the street, in the gardens, in the madrasas, and sometimes with the disciples joining him. Now it's called the dance of the whirling dervishes. And finally, he finds that the what he was looking for was within himself. So all his teachings were, he wrote in that, why should I seek Shams? Because his essence speaks to me. I have been looking for myself. I have sent you a few quotations by him, and he would tell his disciples, listen to the reed. Reed means the bamboo. And the tail, it tells you how it sings of separation. So all his teachings were union with the beloved from whom he has been cut off, and a longing and desire to go back. And that was not Shamsi Tabrizi. Shamsi Tabrizi wrote in transformed Rumi that what he said, separation from Shams was but the appearance. Separation from the divine beloved God was the reality. So he went into states of ecstasy. So people interpret this. They say that when the disciple is ready, the teacher, the guru will come. How the guru comes, somebody will come of one divinity, the spiritual, the divine sense, somebody to come and guide you at that point. But you must have the Mahavishwasa. So that Rumi once wrote, I was a country's sober ascetic. I used to teach from the pulpit, but destiny made me one of your hand clapping lovers. So this is one story. I'm not going to tell you the other story, because we don't have time, I suppose. At one time he wrote, I am neither of the east or the west. No boundaries exist in my breast, he said. Though in body I am far from him, who? The divine. Without the body and the spirit, we are one light. So this is the story of one person, and there are many mystics who use the Sufi way of life, but you won't get them, just like you don't get very many true seekers in any religion, because people who are seekers will have to go even beyond religion. You use your Ishta Devata, like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he was constantly very close to Kali, talk to Kali, get answers from Kali, but Kali was inside him. And when he had to move into the Advaita, from the form to the formless, a guru called Tota Puri had to come and tell Ramakrishna, drop this image now, drop the image. This is what happens in meditation. And Ramakrishna said, I'm not able to, because whatever he had desired, the whole thing was tied up with Kali. He said, I'm not able to, what do I do? So the Guru put his thumb on Ramakrishna's eyebrow center and pressed it, and suddenly the Kali disappeared and the entire universe went into an Advaitic consciousness for Ramakrishna. So that's the sort of thing a Guru will do when the disciple is ready. Otherwise, you can burn out if you're not properly designed. So I'll leave it at that at this point, and I will ask either Vidya or Sridhar to put two more little songs. The first is the Kiran Kailash Kher song, followed by Mirabai song. The first is a Sufi song, and then you hear a Meera Bhajan. See if you find any difference between them. So, you think about this. Hari Om?
Yes, Swamiji.
Think about this, what I told you today. We'll talk about something else tomorrow. I just want you to break those barriers and think about our faith and somebody else's faith. Faith is only one. Every person has faith. Every Atma has faith. Jivatma has faith only in the Paramatma. We get sidetracked. We all go this way, that way. We run after circus. We run after entertainment. We get upset when we are not well. But eventually, every Jivatma, not only human beings, a tree, the animals, the birds, everything is moving towards the source from which we have all come. And that going towards the source is done with a Mahavishwasa and with great love. And that's what Swami Satyananda means when he talks about love. I've sent you that number of his, what he says. He's not talking about an emotional or a sentimental relationship with each other. He's talking of breaking a barrier and allowing the God, the Paramatma, to flow through you as a Shakti of love, because you see the Paramatma in everything around you, in every person around you, in every tree, everything around. You see Paramatma in it, so you cannot get angry. So we have to break these barriers, because today the world needs it more than anything else. Otherwise, remember I said hatred binds, love liberates. The more we hate, the more we'll get stuck with the things that we don't like. So let us, if sometimes it's difficult to go into that path, that's why bhakti can be very difficult at that time. But if you are really, somebody asked me, will we have an avatar? Of course you can have, you will have an avatar. Krishna says, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chadushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya. He says, I come again, sambhavami yuge yuge. I will come every yuga. Why? To protect who? That's what we have to look very carefully. Paritranaya sadhunam. He doesn't say, I'll come and protect everybody. You be mean to your neighbor, it's okay. I'll clean up the bits and put it okay. He's not a plumber or an electrician or a construction worker. He says, you become a sadhu and I will protect you. That is, put your entire faith in me. Don't have fear, don't have anger, don't treat the other person as different from you, because I am in everything. Try and practice that, and you'll find me coming to your house and becoming your dasa. That is what Krishna says. He tells Rukmani, I run behind my devotees so that the dust of their feet may purify me. So imagine that's the level at which the divine keeps a bhakta. Now Hari Om Tat Sat, because we have taken too much time. I'm sorry about delaying it a bit. Tomorrow we'll stick to the time.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji. Hari Om.
Hari Om
Hari
Tat
Om.
Sat. Remember that word Hari Om Tat Sat.
Hari Om Tat Sat.
Hari Om.